Hi everyone, this is my new video and I'll be talking about lung volume and capacities. So let's talk about the different lung volumes and capacities. What is the tidal volume? The volume of the air that moves with each inspiration or expiration is called the tidal volume. So basically if you take this graph, this beautiful graph taken from Ganong, then the volume of the air which moves within each cycle of breath. In one breath there is an inspiration and then there is the expiration. So this amount of volume is called the tidal volume. And if I talk about the inspiratory reserve volume, then the volume of the air which can be inspired with maximal inspiratory effort after passive inspiration. For example, if a person has inspired passively at rest, the way we inspire, and then he or she has to take even more extra amount of air, he is doing some physical work or some exercise, then that is inspiratory reserve volume, that extra amount of air. And if I talk about the expiratory reserve volume, then the volume of the air which can be expired with maximal expiratory effort after passive expiration. For example, if a person expires passively at rest, but he wants to take out even more amount of air, you can say he wants to expire even more, then that extra amount of air in addition to the tidal volume is called the expiratory reserve volume. And if I talk about the residual volume, then the volume of the air which is left in the lungs after forceful expiration. If a person expires forcefully, for example, if a person is at rest and he chooses to expire forcefully, then uh, he will take an inspiration and then he will expire, and then after that if he tries to expire forcefully, then he will you can say exhale out the expiratory reserve volume. Then what is left? The only volume that is left is the residual volume, and that is never expired out, because if we take out all the volume from our volume all the air from our lungs, then our lungs will collapse. Some air is required to maintain the patency of lung, and this volume is also not involved in the exchange of gases. Now if I talk about the functional residual capacity, then the volume of air in the lungs left after normal expiration. That, for example, if a person has expired normally passively, then what is the amount of air that is left in the lung? Then obviously it will be the sum of the expiratory reserve volume and the residual volume, and that is functional residual capacity. The vital capacity is the maximum amount of air that can be expired after forceful inspiration. Uh, forceful yes, forceful inspiration. So basically what happens is that when a person has taken in a full breath, a very with all his inspiratory effort, then this tidal volume and inspiratory reserve volume, all this volume comes in the air. But when he tries to forcefully expire it out, then what will happen? This inspiratory reserve volume will first go out, then the tidal volume will go out, and since he is expiring with full effort, he will also take out the expiratory reserve volume. Then this sum of all these three will be this arrow which is denoting the, you can say, vital capacity. And then what is the total lung capacity? The total volume of the air that is present in the lungs after a maximal inspiratory effort. So what you have to do is that, since vital capacity was the amount of the maximum amount of air which can be expired after a forceful inspiratory effort, then obviously it is talking about the lungs which is remaining, air which is remaining in the lungs, then that is vital capacity plus residual volume, and we get that as total lung capacity. Now inspiratory capacity, then that is tidal volume plus inspiratory reserve volume. Now what are the significance of lung volume and capacities, and why should we know that? You see, first of all, IRV and ERV, the inspiratory reserve volume and expiratory reserve volume, tell us about the functioning of the accessory respiratory muscles, or the respiratory muscles which help us uh, in doing forceful inspiration and forceful expiration, like the sternocleidomastoid which helps in forceful inspiration, or the rectus abdominis which helps us in the forceful expiration. So this is what that IRV and ERV tells us. Similarly, the functional residual capacity is generally increased in obstructive lung disease. I will tell you later how, but it is increased in obstructive lung disease. Also, whenever a person is anesthetized, he or she can't breathe on his own. Matlab, it can't. They can't respire actively. That is why we set these values on the ventilator, so that the required amount of air reaches the lungs. That is why we need the amount of these. You can say the actual calculation of these values has to be done, so that we can set these values on the ventilator. And yes, these all values except residual volume can be calculated by the help of a machine, or you can say an instrument called the spirometer. And also in restrictive lung diseases, the tidal volume, vital capacity, and total lung capacity is decreased. Now we'll talk to you later that what is this obstructive lung disease and the restrictive lung disease. Then let me talk about the respiratory minute volume and the maximal voluntary ventilation. So what is the respiratory minute volume? It is the volume of the air inspired in 1 minute. Now volume of the air inspired in 1 minute. Now if I take if I have to calculate that, then I take tidal volume, because in each breath I am taking tidal volume and I multiply it with breaths per minute, and then I get the respiratory minute volume. This also tells us about, you can say, the normal pulmonary function of a person, and this value is also set on the ventilator so that we can provide the adequate amount of air to the person. Now if I talk about the M.B.B. or the maximal voluntary ventilation, is the volume of air a person can inhale or exhale forcefully in 1 minute. Now you see, here a person is told to forcefully inhale and exhale in 1 minute, and generally it is told for 15 seconds, not minutes, 15 seconds, and then we extrapolate that value for 1 minute. We don't tell a person to do it for 1 minute, we tell him to do it for 15 seconds, and that is, you can say, calculated for 1 minute only. So what does maximal voluntary ventilation tells about? It tells about also about the strength of our respiratory muscles. See, when we are forcefully inspiring and expiring, generally when we do a heavy workout or exercise or some athletic kind of a work, then our all the accessory respiratory muscles are also active, and they help us to inspire and expire even more, because a more amount of oxygen is required. So that is why this value is required, this maximal voluntary ventilation value is required to help us assess the, you can say, the strength of the respiratory muscles. And if I talk about the FEV1 and FVC ratio, you see, what is FEV1 and what is FVC? Now FVC is the forced vital capacity and FEV1 is the forced expiratory volume in 1 second. Now what is that? Now you see that the largest amount of air that can be expired after a maximal inspiratory effort is the forced vital capacity, and generally it is measured as a function of time. A person is told to inspire with full inspiratory effort, and then he is told to expire, and with each passing second we measure the amount of volume of the air that he or she has passed out until now. And it is also an index of pulmonary function, because this value, you can say, the FVC, is altered in diseases, in different diseases like obstructive disease and restrictive diseases. And the fraction of the vital capacity expired during first second of forced expiration is called forced expiratory volume in the first second. For example, simply if I have to put this out, this definition in simple words is that when we are calculating this forced volume capacity, you see, with time this volume of the air which is expired is decreasing. At the starting, obviously the person will expire more, then the lungs will have lesser volume, then they will put out, you can say, they will expire, he or she will expire less, then that is why volume decreases with time, and then ultimately this whole value or this whole amount of air that is expired is called forced vital capacity. And the amount or the volume of the air which is expired in the first second is called the forced expiratory volume in the first second. So what is the significance of this? See, in a normal person generally the ratio is 83%, but in obstructive and restrictive diseases this ratio is altered. Now I will tell you why. In obstructive disease, if I have to give you a simple explanation, then in obstructive diseases what happens is that the lumen of the airways is narrow. Now you see, when the lumen of the airways is narrow, what happens is that when a person inspires, the air goes in, but when during expiration what happens, the lungs try to collapse, or you can say not collapse, but lungs try to squeeze, or you can say retain their size. But since the lumen is already narrow, what happens is that these airways collapse or they close. For example, if this is the lumen, the small lumen of a person having obstructive disease, that is why it is all called obstructive disease, and if a person tries to expire, then this lumen will already, it is narrow, then it will even more narrow, and what happens is that air is not able to come out completely, and there is trapping of air in the lungs, because with each inspiratory effort the person takes in air, but some air is not able to go out because the airways are easily collapsible. That is why air is being trapped in the lungs. So you see, that is due to this obstruction to the airflow during expiration, what we see is that the forced expiratory volume in the first second is very less, and the FVC is also low, because obviously since obstruction is there, the person will take, you can say, in that amount of time only in which the normal person is expiring the normal forced vital capacity, he or she will expire lesser amount of that, because obviously the obstruction, there is obstruction to the airflow during expiration. and that is why you see the FV1 is very low, and the FV1 FVC ratio is 50%. The example of obstructive disease are the emphysema, your you can say bronchitis, chronic bronchitis. These are all the examples of obstructive disease. Now if I talk about the restrictive disease, then restrictive diseases are those diseases in which the lungs become rigid and fibrotic. Now what do you mean by rigidity? See, neither the lungs will expand, neither they will, you can say, contract, neither they will be able to inspire, or neither they will be able to expire, because since there has been increased fibrosis of the lung airways, they will not be able to, you can say, regain their shape, neither they will be able to move out, nor they will be able to move inwards. Then that is why you see that, since, see, in this forced expiratory volume in the first second, the ratio is 90%, even more increase than this. Why? Because since the inspiration is also not that good, the expiration is not that good, and there is no obstruction to expiration, the thing is that the person will not be able to expire. You can say, since, see, the inspiration, he takes a normal amount of air, but the expiration is also just equal to the inspiration. The both are bad. Inspiration is also bad, and expiration is also bad. But expiration is, you can see that if the forced vital capacity is also not good here, since the lungs are not able to expire fully, and they are fibrotic, but the airways are not collapsing here. Some amount of air can still pass out. That is why the forced expiratory volume in the first second is normal, and there is no collapsing of the airways. It's just that since they have become rigid, they can neither, if this is a normal airway and this is fibrotic, then neither it can expand and become this large, or neither it can, you can say, expire and become this small. This is what is happening in the restrictive lung disease. That is why in restrictive lung disease, what we see is that, since the ratio of the forced expiratory volume to the forced vital capacity is 90%, because there is decrease, there is, you can say, a proportionate decrease in both of these things. But here what we see is that the forced vital capacity is decreased, but there is disproportionate decrease of the forced expiratory volume in the first second. That is why this all ratio differs in restrictive lung diseases. And example of restrictive lung diseases are all the fibrosing diseases like the silicosis or sarcoidosis, in which there is increased fibrosis of the lungs. So I end my video today, and I told you about the significance of lung volume and capacities. If you like this video, give a thumbs up, comment down the comment section, and please subscribe. I will see you in the next video. Till then,